Coming to us, wherever you are coming to us from today. I'm Kathleen Scott, Vice President for Leadership Development and Partnerships here at the American Association of State Colleges and Universities, ASCU. I'm delighted to welcome you to kick off today's conversation and introduce our esteemed speaker. As you can see, our meeting design today is webinar format, so you will see our speaker and his slides, but we don't have the opportunity to see you. So that we do have a sense of who is in the room. If you drop your name, role, and institution in the chat, that would be helpful for us. And along with one word to describe how you're feeling today. These are difficult times in higher education and a happy time for the students who will be commencing and graduating and celebrating transition to a new season as we celebrate so many commencements around the country. We have a short time together this afternoon and a lot of information to cover, so we're going to get right to the program. I want to begin with a warm thank you to our sponsor for today's conversation, EAB. EAB has been a long-time thought partner with ASCU, and we know many of you on this call work very closely with them. Leading our discussion on the future of student success and the tectonic shifts that will shape our future for many years to come is a familiar face and voice to many of you, Dr. Ed Bennett, Managing Director for EAB. Despite the challenging times we're navigating and some sobering trends and statistics that Ed will share with us over the next 40 minutes or so, he has promised to leave us with hope and ideas, as we know that everyone on this call shares our commitment to build a strong future for our students, institutions, and campus leaders. We will, as we always do, follow up today's call with a copy of the deck that Ed's going to share, as well as any other resources that are referenced throughout our conversation. We welcome your comments and questions via the chat. And I'll pop a link in the chat to Ed's bio, as I know he likes to share a bit about himself when he presents. So without further ado, I will pass the virtual mic to Ed Bennett. Looking forward to the conversation, Ed. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Kathleen. Just checking to make sure the audio works and everybody can see me and my slides. Really enjoying also all the names and roles and schools going into the chat. It's giving me great context here for understanding who is on the line. So please keep that up. Also, maybe you'll see a friend of yours somewhere out there. So that's also nice too. Small community. I'm also seeing a lot of current EAB partners, especially Navigating Starfish partners in here. So I know that, and right there, just saw a Moonshot partner too, East Carolina. That's great. So a lot of good partner engagement today. My role today is a couple-fold. One, I want to show you a little bit about some of the work we've been doing, thinking about not what's going on right now, which, is a thing you might not want to be thinking about, as Kathleen led into, but more thinking a little farther down the road, 5-10 years. Where's this all going, especially when it regards to student success? From a tactical standpoint, what I'm hoping to accomplish today is, if you're not terribly familiar with what we're doing at EAB and a lot of the work we do with ASCU, work in a lot of the same areas, then this is a little bit of an introduction. If you do currently work with us, this is an invitation to work with us more, especially if you've already jumped in with some of the services we provide, technology we provide. We just want to make sure you're using them to the fullest extent in these futures. So please reach out to me afterwards if that's something you'd like to have a further chat about. And that's all the disclaimers I'll have to start off with. So let's get into the fun futures work. I do this presentation multiple times a week and have had the privilege and pleasure to do many versions of this over the last few years with ASCU audiences, and you truly are the best audience for this work in a lot of ways. Being who you are, the sort of schools you are, the role that you play in the sector and society and your communities, a lot of the issues that we're going to talk about right now, they're right up your alley. It's also the sort of school I work with the most, if that makes sense. So it's where I have the most background knowledge to draw from. So without further ado, let's dive in. This is me right here, a little bit more hair back in the day, back up there. If you want to throw a virtual tomato at me, here's my email address right here. If you aren't familiar with me, my background's in paleontology. I'm an evolutionary biologist. That's what the doctor's in, not education. I've been working on student success since I came to EAB 18 years ago. So far more experience doing this than anything to do with dinosaurs. That being said, I enjoy studying change over the time. And in the past, I've studied the past till now. How did we get to where we are from a biological standpoint? The futures work here is very interesting because it's the same sort of thinking, but how do we go from here to the future? So where's this all going? And of course, we haven't gotten the future yet, so there's no right answer. Future studies is about trying to figure out possibilities and plausible possibilities so that you as planners can plan ahead for them. So we're going to get into it. Why are we very interested in studying the future right now? Well, there are a lot of, especially enrollment pressures facing higher ed. FAFSA aside, this is stuff that's been going on now for a decade. And from a student success standpoint, EAB's philosophy on success is many things, but one of the things it's led with is ultimately this is an enrollment problem. And for you as administrators, because for those students who leave you, they don't just leave, and that's not a great success story for your school. That's also revenue that walked out the door, and that gives you double motivation for wanting to make sure that those students hang around and complete. So why do we study the future? Well, we study a lot of it because of enrollment. Here's the demographic lift that you have known about and known about for a long time, because we could count the number of babies that were born during the Great Recession, and we will know essentially the population of available traditional age students that will be entering college at the end of this decade, and it won't be great in a lot of areas of the country. But this is something we've been planning for years. Less planning has been done around this, what we call non-consumption at EAB, what everybody else might call participation rate. This is where this is the proportion of high school seniors that are trying college the next year, whether that be just for a semester or whatever it might be, but some sort of post-secondary education. It's fallen considerably since 2016. Got to slide more on that in a moment. Then we got our pandemic declines. Don't need to do much more on this. I think we all kind of understand that we lost about 8% across the country in enrollment. We didn't really get it back. The nuances here that are important is that the more selective you are, the smaller your decline. In fact, plenty of really selective schools are actually growing right now. And for you who are maybe more open access, this might be a bigger number for you in that regard. So it's correlated with selectivity. The thing I'm most interested in / worried about is what else is out there. What other ripple effects from the pandemic will we be digesting for years to come in the student success space, especially because of the nature of children getting older 1 year at a time. That is my biological background. I'm telling you right there. We learned that in grad school. Children apparently age 1 year at a time. I don't know if anybody knew that, but it's true. So given that, the students that are 5 years away from college are 5 years away from college, and we can anticipate where they are by looking at kind of how they're doing right now. So I'm going to give you a landscape for that. We're going to spend the first 20 minutes of this presentation really looking through a lot of the data. You're going to have a lot of questions. This is going to be a whirlwind tour. It is probably more worthy of a 2-hour presentation, just to give you a sense of how dense this is. So please throw your comments in the chat. I'm also, well, I'll share this resource later. We have an insight paper that goes into each of these 6 things that I'm going to get into in greater depth. So if you want to get into, really nerd out about it and look at my sources and things like that, then we'll make sure that we can pass that along to ask you as well. I think you might already have that actually, Kathleen, in the bundle. Okay, so we'll do that first, and then we'll get into the more fun, optimistic stuff, which is what are some visions of the future? What are the stories we're going to tell? What makes me qualified to this conversation? Well, I have a certificate. I went to the University of Houston for a week with these fine people right here and did a professional certificate in foresight and future studies. In this room here, you're looking at folks from the Coast Guard, from NATO, from governments of Singapore, Mexico, Canada, a lot of places that are looking, where are we going? And we're all learning this common methodology for, essentially how strategic planners will look that far out. And not just sort of wave their hands, like how do we do it with the principle behind it? Well, the Houston methodology, by the way, if you're interested in learning more about this, I encourage you to check out houstonforesight.org. This is a pretty big experience for me, and a lot of higher ed folks get really attached to these concepts. Futurists, at least in the Houston School of Thought, are trying to deliver 4 ideas or 4 stories of the future that kind of bound the possibilities. I'm using the energy markets as an out of industry example here to give you a sense of how this works. Baseline, that's the future of the next 5 years-ish, where we're going if everything continues on as it is right now. And in the energy markets, that would be continued reliance on fossil fuel with some green stuff. A collapsed future would be the worst case scenario. What if things go really wrong? From an energy grid standpoint, perhaps eco-terrorists take over the grid and we don't have any more electricity or any of those, any of the ability to work through an energy grid. That would certainly be a collapsed future for many of us. A transformation future is the opposite. That would be where we truly transcend the current system, discard it, and replace it with a new one. So an energy market example, that would be a fully green system. And, maybe we're not even driving around with cars in this system. Maybe we're, being shot around in hydraulic tubes or something like that, whatever the future might be. And then the new equilibrium future is kind of the weird future, and it makes it super interesting because it's the same environment, but with new winners. And in the energy example, that might be still reliance on fossil fuels, but with a little bit of green tech, or sorry, green tech becomes more and more prominent in what we're doing, and fossil fuels fall away. So that's the sense of what we're going to do here. I'm going to build all four of these futures for you from a student success standpoint, and give you some, concerning futures that'll be challenging, and some optimistic futures that might be things that you want to work towards, or at least keep in the front of your mind. Okay, thank you for putting my bio in there, Kathleen. I appreciate you. All right, drivers of the future. We're going to do 6 of them. Remember, this is going to be drinking from a fire hose. I apologize. I'm going to talk really fast. There's a lot to cover. Put things in the chat in the QA if you want me to follow up, and I'll pause when I take a breath in about 15 minutes. So here we go. 6 forces. We're actually going to skip this slide and get right into what they are. Okay, driver number 1 is college value. So what do I mean by that? Do students think they're going to get what they paid for in terms of time and money? It's a pretty simple question, but it has ramifications across all of our industry when you're thinking about, say, some of the political heat that some of us may be taking, the skepticism from parents, employers, whatever it might be. It all kind of bundles into this. Are we doing a good thing, and are students getting what they paid for? Fortunately, the students are a little bit more skeptical than they would have been in the past. This was our participation rate coming out of high school directly into college. I'm going to do a lot of talk about traditional age students. I'm going to just go ahead and acknowledge that we all know that students are not all traditional age, of course. I just need to ground a lot of this work in a specific age group and year, as you'll see in a moment. So here's what we've used. So you can see a 8 percentage point decline in participation rate going all the way back to 2016, and this was a pre-pandemic thing. Unfortunately, this unfortunately for us, maybe fortunately, depending on how you look at it, this is being driven by some scare headlines that really aren't true. If you get past the headlines, you find out college is still an incredible value. It definitely has the ROI for students. Our wage premium is near all-time high. Don't believe me, this is Aspen saying that. Our net cost has actually fallen by 4%, according to Brookings, since before the pandemic. Net cost, not list cost. It makes a difference. And our debt is not $200,000 a student, as the New York Times might have you believe. Actually, average debt for students, especially coming from an institution such as yours, is going to be less than 25K. Now, geography is going to matter here. Type of school is going to matter. But get into the data. You can look at the Fed right there, and they basically are telling you what we've known for a while, which is students are graduating with car loans, not mortgages, when it comes to student debt. And here's a little interesting nugget. If you dig in really deep, it's those quote unquote like non-useful liberal arts humanities majors. Nope, that's totally wrong. By the time that those students, former students, reach their mid-30s and towards 40, there's a crossover event where earnings from technical majors like engineers or health professions will cross over, where the humanities earnings will cross over, and those folks actually make more money on the back end of their careers. What's going on here? Well, it's easy to think about when you think about it. If you are an engineer, you have to continuously reskill, or else there's another class right behind you that has more current knowledge, and they're less expensive. So it's this continual treadmill where you have to continuously improve or become management. On the other hand, if you are a liberal arts major, maybe you spent your 20s, as a barista or in grad school or something along those lines, but the time you reach your mid-30s, you become a manager, and you're moving up in the ranks. Well, it turns out that these humanities majors are pretty good at the human thing, which is kind of something that you want in your manager. So there's an executive rank that emerges from the folks that are pursuing these sort of degrees. And it's something we don't acknowledge enough because we're so focused on the short-term returns of students who are right out of college, if you will. So good, important stories to tell. And again, New York Times has got a whole write-up about this. So if you're looking to defend the liberal arts at your school, that might be worth checking out. So there's a mismatch here, and how we resolve this is going to be one of the uncertainties that we need to understand as we go forward to the future. This is not purely a tell our story better kind of thing. We actually have to deliver. The easiest way to get this to work would be if you have one of your students go home and convince their younger sibling or cousin or next door neighbor, this was a totally valuable experience. Look at the job I got. You should go to college too. You specifically should go to this college. That's what you want to get across, is those proof points, the case studies. And we're going to have to do a little extra work integrating career prep into the curriculum or the overall student experience to get that to happen. Number 2, it's evolving demographics. We all know that Gen Z is diversifying. I like to show this just to drive home the point in terms of an evolution of generations. For those of you on the line who were born between the years 1965 and 1980, I really apologize. I'm going to have to do something to you that's going to make you incredibly uncomfortable. I am also Gen X, and I'm incredibly comfortable about putting us on a graph. But here we are. We're going to get through it. Don't worry. We can go back to being ignored in about 2 minutes. So people of color, Gen X, about 30%. Millennials, about 40%. And Gen Z, racial plurality. So this is the makeup of your student body, but it's something you know just looking around your campuses. And again, for some of you, this is really old news because you had this diversification happen years ago. But there are other ways to look at diversity, and certainly Zs who are very interested in identities, they don't themselves want to be labeled, but they're very interested in identities as a concept. They're going to look at something like this. At college age, Gen X, about 4% of us were out of the closet. For millennials, it was over 10%, and over 20%, 1 in 5 of Gen Z identifies as LGBTQ. And I'll tell you, the 4 out of 5 that don't, yeah, they're best friends with the 1 out of 5. So this is a big allyship generation. This is a huge issue for them, and one that they're fairly unified front on. And critically, it's one where they see a distinction between them and you because of the evolution that you see here. Some other quick stats that we just go through. First gen status, here defined as, did you grow up in a household with an adult that at least have a little bit of college? Now, the narrative we have is, of course, more and more first gen students. And for Gen X, about 3/4 of us were first gen students based on this definition. For millennials, it was a smaller number, just 2/3. But for Gen Z, it's really getting up there. It's about 43, is it 43% of Gen Z grew up in a household with a parent who at least tried college. So for some of you, it might be worth looking to see if your first gen numbers are truly trending as you thought that they were. For others of you, it might be worth looking to say, well, wait a minute, do we have a new class of students here? They're not really first gens, but they grew up in a household with an ex or a parent, maybe a parent that did have loan burden, that didn't have the best experience with college, that didn't complete. So even though that student has some experience with college through their parent, it may not be a good experience. There may be some skepticism there that you want to overcome. It's kind of an emerging class as the Axis work that we did years ago. Well, we grew up and had kids, and now they're going to college. So that's a different class of folks with different mentalities that we might have encountered before. So this is just one of those things to consider updating yourself on a little bit. The good news is that the participation rate in college is still pretty high as a generation goes. I showed you the declining numbers before. This is how many Zs were enrolled in college in 2017. This number's fallen off a bit, but not by a lot. They still really like us. They're just open to alternatives and want you to, show them the value. Other quick stats to point out here: the adult undergraduate market is also evolving, and not in a good way. This is a market that has not recovered since the pandemic. And I'm not talking about master's degrees here. This is adult undergraduates. Master's degrees are still doing just fine. Here's a market that does seem to be growing, which is dual enrollment. Now, they're not the same size. There's about 10 times as many adult undergrads as there are high school students in college via dual enrollment. But the growth in dual enrollment is so interesting to look at because you can see a trend that's going to continue. And there are some schools out there that are already, really, really bought in on this. The problem is that dual enrollment programs in a lot of areas are cost losers. You're not getting paid for these students necessarily by a government or the students themselves. And the hope of converting them into a future undergraduate or a full-time undergraduate post-high school is, it's thin. You don't have any kind of hooks in them. So schools are looking at more and more different ways to monetize this in a way that works out for them. But it is definitely a trend we're keeping an eye on because of how fast it's accelerating. And the story here is really easy. Students don't want to take AP tests. Why should they have to take a test to get the college credit if they just take the college class and get the college credit? It's up to us to figure out a system that's going to work for them and us and be financially viable. But there's a huge role to play here that you'll see in a moment. There's a question here about statistics with students with disabilities and the demographic changes. There's all kinds of intersectionality studies out there. This is, lots and lots of data on this. Disability specifically is one that I'm not sure I've seen recently pop up, but if you dig a little bit of Googling, you'll be able to find that, I'm sure. Particularly, we'll refer you to the State of Higher Education report that I'm about to show you actually on this page right here, because it's got a lot of data that might actually, I'm not sure if they have something about that or not, but they might be worth checking out. Anyway, that was a little bit of an aside. Let me show you some data. Driver number 3 is student mental health. What we know, what you see on your campus all the time, is that needs have pretty much doubled in the last decade. Here's anxiety, here's depression, here's the use of therapy. I just cherry picked these 3 numbers, but there's all kinds of other numbers that basically tell you the same story. Gen Z is incredibly attuned to their mental health. They are an incredibly destigmatized generation, at least as compared to older generations. So they're using more services and they're demanding more services. This is a normal part of their life. They might also have legitimately more stressors than we had. If you think about the rise in social media, has a very very interesting correlation with a lot of the rise in these needs. And I'm sure a lot of dissertations will be written about that for years to come. So that's sort of the intersection of the two things happening at the same time. They're more comfortable talking about it, and they might actually have more reason to talk about it than we have in the past. From a student success standpoint, here's the concern. It's now becoming a retention threat. So here are students who have considered stopping out in the last 6 months. Gallup and Lumina, this is the survey I was referring to. They call it the State of Higher Education Report. You can find the 2023 version. 24 should be coming out pretty soon. They've got a report that they put out every year since the pandemic, essentially surveying what's going on in the landscape. One of the things they ask about is mental health and whether or not you've considered leaving school. It is now the #1 reason why students are considering leaving school. In the past, it would have been cost or academic difficulty, or I just don't belong here, I don't feel like this is worthwhile. And those things are still there. The light green is associates, the darker green is the bachelor's degrees, which are going to be most of you on this call. But these reasons are still out there that students are citing for why they might want to take some time off. But look at emotional stress and a prior mental health diagnosis. These are the big reasons that they're citing as why they want to take time off. There are also reasons that you might be the least well equipped to deal with because you've been working on the other problems for years. And now this is the new thing. The really good news is that been showing data like this for 2 years. In the last 6 to 12 months, there's been a lot of movement on your end of things. Schools are really investing in things like stepped care models and finding trusted third parties to outsource their services to. So a lot of movement here. We have some things that we can do and navigate and Starfish to help with this as well. And I'll allude to them in just towards the end of the presentation. All right, now we're getting into the real meat. I'll tell you, this is the emotional low point of the presentation is right here. So it's about the academic preparation issues that we have coming our way. It's going to be a big deal. We're not talking about this enough, but again, good news. We've started talking about more this year than ever before, in part because I think you've seen enough. Your faculty have told you enough times. These students are different than what I had prior to the pandemic. My classroom is not quite the same. What's up? You may have heard this in less polite language. Things along the lines of, can't we just get some better students around here? Well, maybe not. Let me show you why. So we have an unseen threat lurking below the surface. I call it the math shark because you've got to give a little cute, funny name to something that's kind of scary. It's a shark because it's below the surface. We're not talking about it, but we can kind of tell it's there. The fin is poking out, and it's definitely coming our way slowly, and there's ominous music. So what are we talking about here? Well, here's your current entering class. You just had them come in. A lot of them took the ACT when they were seniors. About 20 states require this for their high school seniors. Here's the baseline of where ACT scores were in terms of college readiness in the 4 subject areas in 2019. Now, these are all high school students, not just college goers. And of course, not every student's gonna be great at everything. But this is kind of the baseline, if you will, of preparation. 4 years later, it looks like this. And these gaps are concerning for sure, but they also explain your world a little bit in terms of that response that you might have with your faculty. Well, they legitimately didn't learn as much and they weren't as well prepared when they showed up. It's not their fault. They had an weirdest high school experience ever, if you will. And it's now our job to patch a lot of the holes in their learning that they're bringing to us. Again, not their fault, but it is our responsibility now. And the good news is that there are lots that schools can do. It's just a matter of doing it and doing it quickly. Because this problem is not going to go away. Here's your class of 27, the incoming class straight from high school there. They're currently in 9th grade. I used some math here and I found out the 9th graders were in 8th grade last year. And in 8th grade last year, they took a test called the iReady assessment. A lot of them did, about 11 million students. It assesses their essentially their readiness for college math is the framing that they have. College or career math, I should say. Here's where we look like historically. Here's all students, and then students broken down by communities. These are not the individual students. These are the majority enrollment at their high school. So think about this as a community fingerprint, if you will, or profile. So this is where we were in 2019. Here's where we are now. So we're pretty much across the board off the mark, some communities more so than others. But this is not an encouraging sign. And I'll tell you, looking deeper at this data, it's not recovering. These students are not coming back to baseline at a pace that suggests that they'll be back to what we were used to pre-pandemic by the time they reach your doors. The classes at 25 and 26 that you have coming in, 24, 25, and 26, I should say, are also impacted. We just don't have good data on them. So there's a kind of an even, more invisible math shark that's hanging out, possibly already showing up on your campuses. Math shark's pretty long-lived. Check this out. Fall 2031. If you have one of these people living in your house, a 5th grader, the bad news I have for you is that they'll be there until the 2030s. Maybe that's a good thing for you. It's a little joke. Last year in fourth grade, they took the iReady assessment. Younger students tend to do better on this in terms of readiness. They haven't fallen off as much. And here's where we would have been historically, but here's where we are now. And these gaps are very concerning in terms of their extent, but also look on the far right and you'll see an emerging equity gap, a re-emergence of equity gaps, if you will, would be in our future if we don't do anything about this. So this is super concerning, but because in the 2030s, we may be trying to re-close equity gaps that we spent 20 years trying to close. We don't want to do that. Let's not go to this future. I have a whole story about how you might be able to convince people not to go here in just a moment and why it's so important. It's the collapsed future. So there we are. So sustainable scope is our fifth driver, and this is where things start to pick up a little bit in the optimism. For many of you, you've been around for a bit and you've seen higher education go through cycles. In the early 2000s, the mantra would have been more with more. So many millennials everywhere, we're recruiting them and we're building out campuses and we're adding programs and we're building dorms and climbing walls and lazy rivers and all the things. And then the millennial boom tapered. And in the 2010s, the mantra became more with less, because guess what? We still have the dorm and the lazy river and all those programs. So we have to figure out how to do all the things, but with less students and less revenue, or fewer students and less revenue than we had before. So then the mantra became more with less, efficiency and belt tightening and all the things. Everybody loves working in those environments, I know, but that's kind of what it was. Now there's been a capitulation, and in the 2020s, the mantra is becoming less with less. What does this mean? Because it seems like two bad things. It's actually a good thing. Less with less is an institution saying we are no longer all things to all people. We're going to focus on the things we do really well and the things we want to be really good at in the future. And we're going to let other things go, either because we found out they weren't that important, or we found someone who we could outsource to that can do it better and cheaper than we could have, or let's just be real, we don't have the staff to be able to maintain this anymore. If we're going to keep this thing together, we're going to have to get more focused. The good news is when you get more focused, you get more focused. It means you get better at things. And it's also a great staff morale thing. If your staff feels overworked and stretched thin, being told a message of, we're actually going to do less around here, but we're going to do it better, can be a great morale boost for them. This is not just me blowing smoke. This is a real thing that CBOs are saying. Here's a survey where CBOs describe their financial situation. Only about a quarter of them said things were back to normal from where they were before the pandemic. The other 3/4 are in some way, shape, or form trying to rebuild or find themselves. This 18% here, these are the less with less folks. And the reason we thought the 18% was so interesting because just last year, it was 3%. So this is a big movement in terms of institutional mindset, and one that you might see more of going forward. If you're a senior leader, you might already be having these conversations. If you're sort of a middle manager, middle rank type person, expect this more. You're gonna have a responsibility in this world. One of your responsibilities is to tell those bosses, the cabinet, no, we can't do that. We cannot afford that unless you take some other stuff away. Remember, less with less. And so there's going to be that conversation up and down the ladder, if you will, in terms of how to do budgeting going forward. Driver 6, it's the big open-ended one. It's AI. Everybody's got something to say about AI. I've got a couple quick things to say about AI that are sometimes a little bit eye-opening for audiences. Not a conversation about academic dishonesty or bias or all the things that are current conversations for our AI as we roll out. Talk a little bit more to the future. This is where AWS thinks we're going to be using AI by 2028. And this is the graph to pay attention to down here. Nearly 90% of workers anticipate at least using AI a little bit in their job. And over 50% of them say moderate or heavy use. I got to be honest, I'm already over here in the moderate, and it's only 2024. I completed an entire EDUCAUSE application in under 2 hours using ChatGPT. Don't tell EDUCAUSE, but that was a big time saver. Something that would normally have taken me several weeks probably to get done. So thought it was appropriate for EDUCAUSE to do it that way. I hope they pick me so I can tell them that story. If you're an EDUCAUSE reviewer out there, find my application and say yes. What kind of skills do AI workers need? This is super interesting as well. I'm going to read down the first 5 things on this list. Critical thinking, creative thinking, coding, ethics, and communication. You know that Sesame Street song about one of the things is not like the other? Well, let's take coding off the board here. Critical thinking, creative thinking, ethics, communication. You teach these in all of your programs. Where do you really, really teach them? It's humanities and liberal arts. So calling back even to that first slide I showed you, where there's a huge possibility for these programs, renaissance, if you will, going forward, if they can more clearly align their offerings to the career value that you have. Well, here's an even better opportunity. It turns out AI coders, prompt engineers, if you will, in the future, yeah, they might speak English. That might be the coding language of the future, as my colleague Afia says. So just something to think about, a little different food for thought as you are navigating the AI conversations on your campus. This might be something you actually want to lean into as a career and skill development thing, because it's certainly something that your students are going to need. Cool. All right. So we just went through a lot there, and got 15 minutes, which is perfect amount of time. Technically 14 minutes I have left. So let's get into the 4 possible futures that we want to imagine. That here they are. I bundled everything I just showed you into kind of 2 axes. On the horizontal axis, you see essentially, are we ahead of or behind rising student needs? I think all of us right now would say we're probably, let's be honest, we're a little behind, especially with a lot of the changes that are happening now, at least as a country. Individual schools may vary. Vertical axis, that's sort of an acknowledgement that we're probably not getting bigger. We're not going to expand our scope over the next few years, unless you happen to be a flagship or something along those lines. I'm guessing not that many on the call here today. So we're either going to stay about the same size and have the same impact, or we might actually get smaller. And remember, small is not necessarily bad. So let's actually talk about what those features might be, because there's one in each quadrant. I'm a very good consultant because I brought a 2x2 to show you today, and I'll walk you through each of the quadrants. So the first quadrant is this. It's kind of your current future. It's a legacy mindset. It's a period of unprecedented change. As I like to say, I don't like to say this, as I often say, this is a period of time with you've never experienced anything like this in your career, and none of your mentors did either. So we're completely making this up as we go, completely unprecedented environment. And a lot of the decision-making processes were kind of slow at a lot of schools. Yeah, that's not going to be a thing we get to do right now. So it's going to feel a lot more like March, April 2020 than say March and April 2019 in terms of how quickly you might have to make some decisions in this environment. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Let's take a look at how quickly the landscape is going to evolve just in the span of while your students are on campus right now and a little bit beyond. So this is your baseline future. This is what's going to happen if we just play out the data that we have already. Well, this year we're talking about finances worsening. Colleges are going to hit that demographic lift in a couple of years. If you haven't felt it already, you'll be feeling it by 26, 27, 28. The National Report Card has been monitoring the same Math Shark data that I have, and they've called, or it's been called, the current ninth grade has been called a lost generation of learning. Not because there's anything special about that cohort, that's just the cohort that got measured, but where their scores are falling back to the level of where my cohort would have been 30 years ago in the same kind of measurements. A little farther out, 2028, we're all going to need to know AI. By the way, those are your current 4-year students entering the job market in 2028. And your demand for mental health counseling is going to continue to rise. This is not going to go away. It'll be something we talk about. Also, by the way, second fastest growing major in the country, it's psychology. The students know what's up. And in 2032, we'll have added 1 million STEM jobs if projections are to be believed. So we have a role to play here in forming this economy. So you can look at this and say kind of a mixed bag, some good things, some bad things. It's definitely a different future that we're going to, and we kind of anticipate a lot of this already. But it's not the most interesting future because it's kind of the one that's familiar. I want to show you some of the other ones. So let's look at the bad future first. This is the one we want to avoid, the worst case scenario. And it's where the math shark leads to the downfall of society. This is a situation where we're behind the student readiness, and we're so far behind that we unintentionally become smaller. We get shrunk because the number of students we have just dramatically declines. Let me show you how that might happen and what the long-term consequences could be. Not because I'm trying to beat you up. I'd really rather you print it out this slide. I mean, not print it out, email it to someone, and then beat them over the head with it virtually to say, this is why we have to take action now. Use it to convince people on your campus to start moving on these things, because it's going to happen pretty quick and we need to get in front of it. So here comes the math shark. What if we don't just have one math shark? What if we've got a Sharknado? A lot of sharks. What's going to happen here? Well, there's kind of a sequential downward spiral that we could anticipate. The first is, if our students are less well qualified compared to our traditional standards, fewer of them are going to get into the programs and qualify for the upper division. That's bad because they're going to leave school. That's bad because, well, faculty morale will fall even further if they start seeing their programs depopulate. and then, start feeling like they're not able to have the impact that they want and not getting the fulfillment that they had in the past. Employers will eventually figure out we're not producing as many graduates, nor are they of the same quality as they would have been in the past. And if you really play it farther out into the 20s or 30s, a lot of those equity gaps that I showed you among the grade school age students will begin to become your problem. Your equity gaps will eventually become employers' equity gaps and societies as well. So we'll make reverse progress on things that we've tried to improve. And if you really want to go far out, like 2040s, this is an economic concern, maybe a national security concern. Because if we have a shortage of diverse knowledge workers that far out, we are not going to be as economically competitive. The only good news I have here is everything that's happening to us is happening everywhere around the world. But let's be the best at this, right? Would be the way I would go with it. So it's the worst case scenario. Everything you see here is very plausible. It's not a forecast in the sense of this is definitely happening. This is what we definitely do not want to happen and what we should be dedicating a huge amount of our work to going forward to prevent this. Let's show you some more optimistic futures because Kathleen promised that and I feel like I should deliver. So here's the uplifting thing. Everything on the left side of this page kind of sucks. We don't want to be in these futures. We're not headed down a good road. I would think many of you feel that way right now. You certainly don't want to avoid the Sharknado. So where can we go? Well, one possibility is we get smaller, but we do it gracefully and deliberately. And we actually do that in such a way that we get ahead of our student needs. In this future, I'm calling new specialists because that's kind of what it is. And this is the weird future. This is where let's get our imaginations going here and have a little bit of fun and just kind of imagine where we might go together. Because here's where most of us are right now in the established models of higher education. 2-year, 4-year degrees, you take classes, you get credits, they add up to a piece of paper, you walk out the door. Most schools are like this, and they're mostly doing the traditional, major with a general education curriculum kind of thing that we all do. There are already some experiments out there where schools are hyper differentiating as diversification and in the market. And I would imagine that in a market where students become fewer, schools will become more competitive. And this is one of the ways that you might become more competitive. Now, in a less with less environment, some of you would just become smaller versions of yourself. Those of you in consortium systems might begin to partner up with your neighbors so that you offer a full curriculum, but each school only offers a part of it. Or you might become a specialist. And if you become a specialist, well, let me show you what that might look like for some of you. This is not an endorsement of anything on this page. It's not a recommendation that you become this kind of school. It's just merely an observation that this is already happening. So some experiments in early hyperdifferentiation. Let's just play them out along these different axes. Everything here is already happening. Already we're seeing an increase in dual enrollment. And there are 2-year schools out there that the majority of their students are actually high school students now. What if they just leaned into that mission and became an extra year of high school should you need such a thing? Maybe because you got bit by the math shark during the pandemic. And if the schools can figure out how to turn that into an economically viable model, then you're really onto something. Down here, you've heard of Southern New Hampshire and Western Governors. Did you know that a lot of these other traditional large flagships are dramatically expanding their scope as well? Purdue bought Kaplan a few years ago to become Purdue Global. University of Idaho is in talks to buy the University of Phoenix. And there's a lot of other things going on like that. Louisiana State University, who just did a webinar with us yesterday, grew their first year enrollment by like 1,000 students. So did Penn State. These are big schools that got bigger. And their specialization would be good at being big. That's not going to be the fate for a lot of you, but it's something that you need to understand is happening in the landscape. Down here, well, these Z's, man, they really want that career value stuff. So you can see why something like the Northeastern Co-op program is an interesting and attractive career immersion experience for them. I'd posit that if you have IT in your name, if you're an Institute of Technology, you're already kind of doing a lot of this work. If you're a military academy, you're definitely doing this kind of work because, well, that's a very immersive career immersion, if you will. But, these sort of models pop out there. You can see schools that regularly advertise, you're coming here specifically because you get the career training embedded in your experience. Up here, what about ideology? Historically speaking, ideology would have been like a religiously affiliated institution. And of course, they still exist. But what if we have different kinds of ideological institutions emerging? Example here, the University of Austin. It's in Austin, Texas, and they are a new experiment based on the Great Books model that has been perfected at St. John's College in Annapolis and Santa Fe for years. But the idea here is that they're a campus that's dedicated to radical free speech. So this is a candor-driven campus, and the reason you might want to enroll here is to have those kind of classroom discussions or discussion with your roommate or your classmates or whatever. It's a place where you can come and speak your mind. We'll see if it works. They're not accredited yet. There's some big names behind it. They're expensive. The idea out here is that there are different ideological elements that could begin becoming differentiators for some schools if they decide to go down that road. This is all a little bit still kind of feeling familiar. I want to get even weirder and go a little ring out from here. Yeah, on cost side of things, what if we just only had 3 years? What if we had a 3-year bachelor's degree? Well, that's being experimented with at places like BYU Idaho. On influence, I already talked to you about good at being big. Well, if you lived in Washington, D.C., like me and Kathleen, you might have an experience like I had the other day, where I popped out of the southern entrance to the DuPont Circle Metro and I looked across the street to a storefront where they were hanging orange curtains. Who was moving into that storefront? It was Syracuse University. And as I turned the corner to walk to the Askew offices, I saw the University of Southern California. Yeah, there's about 30 of them here. None of them are located anywhere near here, except for maybe Virginia Tech. But you get the sense of like people are setting up shop here. Why are they doing that? It's kind of a study abroad experience for their students in the nation's capital. But it's also them forward positioning their political scientists, administrators, et cetera, on Capitol Hill. They're becoming lobbyists. They want to influence because they want to, a lot of the conversations we've had recently are particularly tied up into politics. Now, good news for you. You may not need to open up shop like Syracuse did, because you've got Askew. Askew is a fantastic, one of the things they do, other than letting me have webinars with you around student success, which is really, it's a big part of what Kathleen and I do together. But the other huge part of what Askew is doing is government relations. They're out there working for you on the Hill because, that's what you're asking them to do for you. And they've got a great team for that. So, you can see why this is going to become more important and why some schools might want to specialize on that. But in this case, this might be something also that you just want to get with Askew about. What kind of experience students are having? Well, down here, maybe it's not career immersion. Maybe you want to have a mental health experience on campus. Well, there's schools that are doing this. Notably, Landmark College in New England, 500 students. Every single one of them is neurodiverse. That's what they're trying to do there. They built dormitories and curriculums and programs and have grading rubrics and everything along how to care for students with autism and ADHD. And as someone who falls into the latter category, I'm very appreciative of that because my college experience would have been different. What if more and more schools do that? We know how important mental health is to Gen Z. What if that becomes the thing you're about? If you are a small residential campus and you're looking for the next thing that you're going to do for students, you're kind of well positioned for this. And lastly, up here, talking about Gen Z issues, there are far fewer issues that are more deep to the core of Gen Z than climate change. Look at the headlines right now and you see the activism moment, but this is something they know they're going to live with for the rest of their lives. Well, what if you decide to just make yourself all about climate change? That exists. Unity Environmental University in Maine in 2016 was a failing liberal arts college. In 2024, they have 7,000 students. It's fully online and they have one major. It's environmental studies. They have 4 different flavors of it, 2-year, 4-year, and different enrollment intensities. But all they do there is the environment. That's literally all they do. And it's in their name. If you're going to that school, you're going for that reason. So could you imagine a future where your college or maybe somewhere around you says, we're going to go all in on some issue that Gen Z cares deeply about? And that's going to be our identity. And that's going to be what we're really, really good at in this less with less environment. And we're going to use that as a way to attract those students because they care. Again, not an endorsement of anything on this page, merely a kind of a landscape overview. The last thing I want to say on this page, because I know my time is short, is that in an environment like this, you will get talent concentrated at certain schools. They will become innovation centers, a lot like Georgia State's been for student success for 15 years. The people who work there will then be able to spread their ideas to all of our schools. So in this environment, we all get smarter and better at supporting students because of some of the experimentation you might see on this page or similar. Last future, we're going to do it really quick. Transformation future, it's all about being student-centered. Nobody really knows what a student-centered university is. I posit here that it's personalized college delivered at scale, and you're going to get there with AI with a heavy career focus. This is a huge page full of different kinds of AI applications on campus. Here are some admissions applications that are already happening. Things like a 24/7 chatbot or application concierge, paperwork support. Up here on the academic side of things, you can imagine adaptive majors programs and grading schemes. On the administrative side of things, it's easy to understand stuff like help desk or administrative support, just time-saving stuff. That's the kind of entry road for AI at a lot of schools. For our success community, we got super interesting stuff that's kind of in the pipeline, if you will. Advising concierge, well, guess what? If you got Navigate, this is going to be a thing you have available to add on going forward. Personalized tutor. You know what math sharks really hate? Personalized tutors. Could you imagine an AI that understands exactly, because it knew what I did in high school, it knew what I learned and what I didn't learn in terms of my math preparation, which is kind of Swiss cheesed right now, and it was able to provide me with personalized supplemental instruction at the exact moment I needed it to pass the third week of my pre-calculus course, because that's the one that I'm not ready for. That stuff's coming. So, we're on our way with this. Yeah, we're going to need a bigger tutor, Ken. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. That's I've been trying to figure out how to make that joke for a while there about the bigger boat. I think you got it. Career coaches and resume builders are things that are potentially here that we can be guiding students along with AI from the very start. Personalized emails that you can write to students. We're doing this as well. One of the coolest things we've got is the ability to translate English to Spanish. Want to spend a Spanish language email and you don't speak Spanish? Now you do, because you have an AI that can do that for you. Workflow support, all kinds of automations possible here in a less with less environment with fewer staff. That's something you're going to want. Grant rating is a nice sort of thing if you have there. Remember my EdgeCause application. And then the thing that maybe is the kind of sneaky but really, really important thing here is that AI can help us understand much better what works and doesn't work for student success. It's hard to measure that. Been trying to do it for 20 years. It's really hard to do. AI can give you some additional insights in that. We are beta working with this stuff with a lot of our partners right now. Kathleen, I just have one last slide to show, and then I'll turn it right back to you. And I just want to kind of show for our EAB partners what we've got available to you going forward in terms of where our core competencies fit with those drivers. Up here in the perception of value, we just acquired a company called Forge, totally free to you. They do career simulations paid for by employers, and already like 2/3 of their customers are direct to students. You can start embedding that stuff within Navigate pretty soon. Advanced search is one of our oldest and dearest features. This is going to help you understand how your demographics are evolving in a dashboard kind of way. I have friends who are faculty members that use this just to understand what's going on in the classroom. If you have our student app, you have the ability to have students raise their hand. The number one thing that students are raising their hand for in the hand raise app, they want mental health support. They're asking for help that way. Again, an oldie but goodie, and the thing that I would say, if you're only going to focus on one thing on this page, do this. Get your early warning system beefed up to get ready for the math shark. That is how you beat the math shark. Down here in Less with Us, I already mentioned the advising chatbot. That's the thing we're leading into. And over here on preparing for AI, data governance is actually the first step for that. So this is merely the billboard moment here for our current partners. If you're interested in any of these things, please reach out to me and I will get you connected to the person that is already your representative that would love to have a further chat with you about it, because chances are you already have access to a lot of this stuff and maybe you just haven't turned it on or aren't fully using it. So we'd love to have that chat with you. Every single one of you has a representative. Reach out to me and I'll get you connected. Kathleen, I'm sorry I went a couple minutes over. Here's my email address for anybody who needs it. Yeah, that's what we got.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, Ed. No apologies, please. So much good content, good conversation. Appreciate you painting a picture of the future and giving us lots of ideas, things to think about. We have a lot of campus leaders, from chairs to vice presidents to presidents, on today's call. And I think this deck would be a really interesting conversation to take back as you think about summer retreats and conversations you'll be having as you plan, not just the next year, but the years ahead, so that we can serve today's students and be ready for tomorrow's. Thank you to EAB. Thank you to all of our participants today, taking 45 minutes out of your busy day and a busy season in higher education. We look forward to seeing you at our next engagement. My colleague has popped a evaluation in the chat. We care about your feedback, and look for an email following up with the recording from today, the deck, and any other resources that Ed mentioned, and upcoming opportunities to engage with Ask You. Looks like, Ed, you have one final word you want to add.
I also put a link in the chat. We have a brand new infographic that goes into all 4 of those features much deeper. It literally came out yesterday. I put the link in there. We're super proud of it. It's animated. Go have fun.
Super cool. All right, great. Thanks again, everyone. We'll see you all next time. Have a great afternoon.